You almost got real birds, but I decided against it just because I wouldn't actually kill one of them and the mess and the whole deal. But sometimes we talk about this stuff and it's like unless you see it, you don't really know what's going on. In Leviticus 12, this what's called a Torah portion is notoriously probably the most boring part of Scripture in all the Bible. I'm letting you know. So what happens is you go through Genesis, and you can mostly bear through that because it's a narrative and you can follow the storyline. You go through Exodus, and then, it's mostly pretty good because it's narrative up to right after chapter 24, then you get into the tabernacle system, and that's when you start hitting all the tabernacle laws. And when you do that, you're like, should I check out because does that apply to me or not apply to me, and how does that work? If you're a scholar type, you read it and you're like, yeah, I should know this stuff because it's really difficult to understand the rest of the Bible if you don't know that, so you endure it. That's what happens. How do I know that? Because I've been there. I endured it. I got to know this stuff, so I endured it. And then you just might be able to hang through Leviticus 1 through 7 because now the sacrifices happen, and Yeshua was sacrificed, so I should probably know what that's about. In Leviticus 16, there's the Day of Atonement. So you've heard about this, Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, and you're thinking, well, I can just kind of maybe endure till I get there. But you've got 4 or 5 chapters that everyone knows. You're reading it, and you're thinking to yourself, why? And this is why people can't read all the way through the Bible. It's because you get to these chapters, and you're just like bored outside your mind. Now, for those of you who know, it shouldn't be boring. It's very much important. And I've noticed this with people, is people don't pay attention to something when they don't know why they're supposed to pay attention to it. They can't engage it if they've never lived in an agrarian society, they weren't a part of the tabernacle system, and besides, Jesus came, fulfilled it all anyway, so why do I need to understand something that was fulfilled because it's already done? Well, I might suggest that you will understand Yeshua a lot better if you understand the ongoing ministry of our Master. I would also contend that in everyday life you will experience uncleanness, whether by you or just by the world, and you want to feel whole again. What I've noticed about people who are professing believers is that they still struggle quite a lot. And I'm just thinking to myself, there's some answers for this. There's some ways that we can feel whole again. And I think that if we think in terms of prayer in the Spirit, and we can read the Gospels and see how Yeshua went around and touched lepers, and there's obviously some healing there. But why does that not translate to my life today? And I can read about it, but there's just why? Why is there this gap? Well, this particular text that we're going to cover is going to start with circumcision. And then it's going to go into some leprosy laws and mold laws. And I'm going to camp out mostly on the circumcision, and I'm going to camp out on the cleansing for leprosy. What was that all about? Now, before I do this, I need to do a couple housekeeping items beforehand, so that when we get to the end, no one can mishear anything that I've said. So, with full eye contact, salvation is by grace through faith, not of anyone's works. Amen. You can't work your way into this. It is by faith. That's it. Even sanctification is by his grace. It even says it in Exodus 31 that the sign of the Sinaitic covenant, or when he gave his instruction, is, I want you to do these things, but on the Sabbath I want you to rest. This is a sign for you, so that, in part, you would know that the righteousness that you have isn't because you worked for anything. It's because of my sanctifying work by the Spirit in your life. Okay? Hopefully you can understand. And I have to talk real slow because I get beat up all the time. The emails that I get, it's a lot. Sometimes I think one man should not carry that much weight for such a small congregation. But that's what happens. I say things, so I've got that out of the way. Torah, as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, also referring it means instruction in righteousness in the same way a father would give instruction to his child. I love you. Here's how to live a life of life. Do these things. These are life-giving for you. That's what the Torah means, or Torah means. Here's kind of the end goal, Leviticus 15:31. So I know we're in Leviticus 12, but I want you to see where it's all headed right before the Day of Atonement. Moses says, thus you shall keep, and he's talking on behalf of Yahweh, thus you shall keep the sons of Israel separated from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in their uncleanness by making my tabernacle that is among them unclean. The goal of all of Yahweh's laws is to help us remember that Yahweh, this very holy God, as I've described him, I think it's become a bit of a meme, but it's important, is he's a bit of a nuclear power plant, and you just can't traipse around uranium. You cannot touch this God who is utterly holy in any old way you want. But this God wants to dwell among his people, and so he's invited you and me into a relationship with him by the blood, and he wants to interact with us, but it doesn't give us permission to act however we want. And that's part of what it means for us to be holy, is he wants us to walk in righteousness, and yes, that is reckoned to you, it is bestowed upon you because of who we are in Messiah, but it doesn't give us the right to just act however we want. So, what do? We go to God's instruction so that we might know, how do you, God, want us to act around you? So when I was growing up in the Calvary/Vineyard movement, Jesus was my friend. And he is my friend. Okay? But he's not the kind of friend, like I'm a teacher at a high school. I'm your friend, but that doesn't mean you start calling me Traver. I'm still Mr. Doherty to you. That doesn't mean that you can now make up the rules of when you show up to class or not show up to class. It doesn't mean that you don't raise your hand when you have a question. Now, when you do all the things that you're supposed to do, guess what happens to the friendship relationship that we have? It increases. Because you understand your role, I understand my role, and everything works just the way it's supposed to be. In fact, my rules are not there to make this a poor experience for you. In fact, I've seen in our school system what happens when we let kids do what they want to do. No discipline allows for kids to start to overtake, and then their own fleshly desires ruin everything. The same was true with my experience growing up in the ecclesia, the community of the Lord. It's like, I think what I saw was this overtaking of, and it really was a fleshly desire where people started to ask this fundamental question about the ecclesia and about their spirituality is, what can you do that I might consume, that I might feel close to this God? What in the world? Why? This place is not a place to consume. This place is a place that we come to meet with our holy, holy God, interact with him the way he wants, and we serve. We are a priesthood of believers, and we serve one another. So now we start at the beginning of what's called our Torah portion, Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, when a woman gives birth and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days. As in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. Now on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. And then she shall remain in the blood of her cleansing for 33 days. She shall not touch any holy thing, and she shall not enter the sanctuary until the days of her cleansing are fulfilled. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her menstruation, and she shall remain in the blood of her cleansing for 66 days. When the days of her cleansing are fulfilled for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And then she shall bring it near before Yahweh and make atonement for her. And she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who bears a child, whether a male or a female." Now, if she can't afford that, she can grab some turtle doves. Now, I want you to notice there's the word atonement in there, and now I'm going to try to frame this for all of us. Try. In Ephesians 5, verses 8 through 10, I'm going to read it slow. You don't have to turn there, but maybe you can just kind of track. The Apostle Paul says to all of us, "For you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light, for the fruit of that light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth." Verse 10, "Trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord." Okay. You were in darkness. We have met our Messiah. Now we are in light. Now I'm going to conflate kind of this text with Romans and all this, okay? So if you know your Bible, you'll be able to track. If not, you can still hang on the words. We said no to sin. Sin, both just the wicked, I combined 2 words. Our wretchedness, our internal issues, but the manifestations of our transgressions came out. And that's part of what the instruction of our God, the Torah, condemned in us. "See, look, Paul, you're coveting." And Paul says, I wasn't really sure about this coveting thing, but then I read in the Torah, "Do not covet." And I'm like, ooh, shoot, I do that. So, wait, maybe it's not just coveting. Maybe it's I've taken the Lord's name in vain. Maybe I've committed adultery in some shape or form or whatever. He recognized that in himself, and he's like, I need to stop that. I have sinned. And that's part of what the Torah is really good for. It's called a ministry of death. It's good for pointing out something that you can't see. It kills you. It killed him. How did it kill him? It showed him that he was actually alive, but in sin. And he's like, if I'm alive when I'm held account before God, this is not good for me. So what I need to do is I need to die to that sin. I need to die to this body of flesh. So that way I can be raised with my Messiah and begin to walk with him. And so in Romans, it's about you're saying no to that. And he says, hey, now that you are saved, you are no longer committed. You are no longer obligated to that sin. Now give the members of your body over to righteousness. So if the Torah defined what sin was before, it still defines for us sin afterwards. Nothing changed there. So now what I do is I read the instruction of my God. I've said no to sin, but I don't want to continue to walk in it just because I'm saved. Now I want to hand my body over to the things that are righteous in God. Do I get to make up what is righteous in my God? I don't get to make it up. It's still defined for me in his instruction, so I read it, and now I give my body over to those things, because though I am righteous by faith in who Messiah is in me, now that the Spirit is in me, the Spirit should want to hear the voice of my God. And now, like a sheep, I listen to his voice, which is outlined in the Scriptures, and now I'm going to give my body over to those things. Have you heard me say that we are saved by walking in the Torah? No, not saved by that. That you are sanctified by walking in the Torah? No. However, the instruction of our God are tools in his hands that he uses to help us walk in that sanctification. Now, I did read, and this is important that we catch this, in Ephesians 5, I even stopped at verse 10. You see where it says, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Trying. Full disclosure. Not that I don't anyway, but sometimes it's better if I preface it that way. I'm a whole Bible believer. I want to understand all of it, and I want to walk in all of it appropriately. Part of where I get into trouble, and I don't mind a little bit of trouble, but I don't get over trouble, is there are parts of the Scripture that if I say the instruction of our God was given at Sinai, it is pretty clear that we don't do all of it. So what is it, Trevor? Do we do all of it or not do all of it? And I've tried to refine my language over the years, but it's difficult. I admit it. It's hard. I would say there's no law in the Bible that I disregard. What I try to do is try to obey appropriately given our context. Kind of like when Daniel was in Babylon, he did a fast. When I was growing up, it was called the Daniel fast. Like, hey, Jacob's laughing because he knows. Because we understand now that Daniel fast, it wasn't even really a fast. When he was in Babylon, they're going to serve pork and other things that Daniel shouldn't be eating at the king's table. And so what Daniel does is he takes the diplomatic, political maneuvering way and says, hey, I'm not going to eat any of that stuff. What I want to do is I want to eat vegetables. By eating vegetables, was he actually going on a fast? I mean, I guess of sorts, but not really. What he was really seeking to do was not eat the defiling king's food that was full, his table full of unkosher or non-God sanctioned edibles. He wasn't going to do that. So he and the men with him said, we're going to present it in this way, because if we say we're just going to eat what our God says to eat, that probably wouldn't have flown well with the king. So we're just going to say, can we just eat fruits and veggies or whatever they said? And we all look at that and we read back into the text. We do what's called eisegesis. We're not really sure what's going on, so we're just like, we don't really want to fast for 40 days, so let's do a Daniel fast. There's no Daniel fast. It doesn't even exist. It's just people read the Bible that have no idea what they're doing. That's what's going on. What is going on? All Daniel is doing is taking the instructions of his God and rightly applying them in what's called diaspora. He is exiled to Babylon. He is there, and he's like, no, I'm going to do this the best I can given my situation. So that's where we are today. We're not wandering around in the desert. We are post-Messiah. He's died and resurrected. And however we come to do this, we're going to do it in an appropriate way given our exile situation. That's the best I could say it at this moment. Now, in all of that, what I recognize is, okay, we read through this and what's going to happen is, all right, so a woman has a baby. If it's male, we're going to have to go through a cleansing process for 33 days. If it's a female, 66 days, and then we've got the 1 week and the 2 week. Then we've got these turtle dove things, and are we supposed to sacrifice and all this kind of stuff? And is it really a sacrifice? In this context, it's actually not a sacrifice. And you'll see that in a little while, I hope. All right, first let me clarify a few things. In the Bible, this nuclear reactor of a God cannot be around death. That's the bottom line. No death in God's presence. So that's really what it means to be clean and unclean. No death in God's presence. When a woman is menstruating, the life is in the blood and the blood is going out of her body. That doesn't make her a sinner. It just means that around the nuclear reactor, we've got this situation of this flow of blood out of her that makes her what's called in the Hebrew tummy. Tahor, tummy. I've heard it, I like tamai. It sounds a lot more better. It sounds more better in my English-speaking ears, but in Hebrew it's tummy. I can't do anything about that. But this idea of clean and unclean doesn't mean sin and unsin or clean and dirty. It just means able to be around God, not able to be around God. Now, sometimes sin is also unclean, so that is a category of uncleanness that we don't want to get ourselves into. Okay, so see the difference here. What's happening here in this text isn't about clean and dirty. It's not about sin and unsin. It's just about how we are around God in the nuclear reactor situation. That's what it's about. So, why does it seem that a woman is, let me just say it how people think about it when they read this. Hey, why is a woman double punished when it's a girl and not a boy? That's not what's happening. What's happening is, this is based on all the research that I could possibly do, when a woman has a boy, there is a loss of blood, and then you have the placenta and all that kind of stuff, and so there's a purifying time that goes on. But it's not going to perpetuate a menstrual flow in the son. But when a woman gives birth to a woman, there's going to be more menstruating that happens. So it's this kind of this double loss of life that's going to happen as it continues to reproduce. It doesn't mean that Yahweh doesn't love them both the same. The scriptures in this part is like nothing like that. Zero like that. Now, of course, what happens to Mary and Joseph when Yeshua is born? Do they circumcise him on the 8th day? They do. Do they go to the temple and bring these doves, these turtle doves or whatever they are? They do. At any moment in time, did Joseph and Mary think, I've just had this beautiful baby, the Messiah of the world has come, and boy, we've sinned and we're dirty, and we need to go take care of this with the priest? Never once. It's not like that. Just a very, very natural flow of life. That's it. So easy. Nothing to it. Because they recognized that in the same way you walk into Mr. Doherty's classroom, you don't just say, what's up, Trav? What's hanking? What's shaking? You don't do that. They're around a holy God. They understand that, and they're just going through the regular process. Just like you should. Now, I want to camp for a little while now on the circumcision piece. In verse 3 it says, now on the 8th day the flesh of the foreskin shall be circumcised. And I've got a lot of people that are watching right now that are going to wonder, how in the world are you going to handle this? Well, let me tell you. I'll tell you how I'll start it. I'm circumcised. And I'm glad I am. Like growing up, you're reminded every day of your life that there's something going on here. Now, you might not be fully aware of it because you're 8 days old or so forth when you are circumcised. And, it's just normal. And then you go in the boys' locker room and you're like, whoa, that looks a little bit different. So there's the thing, right? A thing of boyhood that is different for sure. But I've had people ask, and even in our talk time, is if I want to obey the scriptures and I'm a whole Bible Christian, if I come to know the Lord when I'm 26 years old, do I need to get circumcised? And the way that I phrased it is no, but I also said that if you want to, I wouldn't see anything wrong with that. And I don't know that I would still see anything wrong with it. But I think that there is a further clarification that I think I need to make, and that is, I do not see anywhere in the New Testament that anyone was circumcised other than trying to become religiously Jewish, or Paul circumcising Timothy because he had a Greek father, that he was going to go witness to Jews and he didn't want that to become a stumbling block. And Paul does say, stay as you are. And he says it repeatedly. So I'm just going to make this little caveat before I move any further. I want to make you a deal as people, okay? Make you a deal. Here's the deal. When I say something wrong and you bring it to me and it's clear that you're right, I'm going to say, I see your point, I retract, I messed up, I'm going to move on. You're right. And that happened to me. It happened to me in that I did think that there were times in the New Testament that I felt that people were circumcised for the right reasons, and there's no indication of that. So I was wrong on that. So I just stood corrected, and I was wrong on that. What can I do? When you're wrong, you're wrong. Here's the deal. When you're wrong, and I point it out to you, you should accept that. Okay? What happens to me is, and I've gotten burned on this a number of times, part of my job as one of the shepherds here is to walk in humility and to say I'm sorry when I have messed up, and I do try to do that. You would think that if I did that, what would happen on the other end is they would be gracious with me, but sometimes they now see me as a punching bag and they will keep hitting. And I'm like, what, why? Why? And I certainly didn't say that I was wrong so I could have you say you're wrong. That's not why I'm doing it. But at the same time, I do try to model humility, but I'll tell you, I've been burned enough that sometimes I'm like, I might wait a little bit before I say that I'm wrong on something, just because I got to assess the situation first. I don't know how much I'm going to get beat up for something. I'm learning. I am 54 years old, and let me tell you, when I read in Ephesians chapter 5, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord, that's important. I'm trying. Why do I beat this one up? It's because it is evident in the Torah itself that as we understand our context in Babylon, that I am not willing to let any of Yahweh's instruction go, but I must admit that I don't know exactly how to do all of it rightly in our present day context. I don't know. And it's hard. And I realize that Yeshua's house is probably never going to be big. 1 o'clock on a Saturday. I mean, that's our first strike against us. Next strike is the law. Next strike after that is, I got my list of things. But as I work through the instruction of my God and try to apply it appropriately, it's going to take some time. And I don't even know if I'm going to get it all the way right by the time I die. And what happened to me was I kept trying to get it right, and I realized that I was 54 years old, or 52 at the time, when even Yeshua's house started to maybe think about being in existence. And I'm like, I better go ahead and try to start something now, because I think by the time I get a little bit better at this, I might be about 90. What am I supposed to do? So you just start where you are, and you hope that there's a community around you that together we might say, we are the light. We walk in the light, and what we're going to do is we are going to try to not walk in the darkness, but we're going to try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. So, let's try. And let's do it in graciousness. Okay, so now, my official stance now, if someone were to ask me my 30-second elevator speech, which I don't have, but I would say, hey, if you have a child, and it's a boy, circumcise him. If you can get it on the 8th day, great. If Kaiser won't let you in, you can only do it on the 4th day, fine. Not optimal, but try to do it on the 8th day. If you can't, day 4 is fine. Day 5 is fine. Get it done quickly. I personally do not remember circumcision or any kind of pain. And I have never met any man that has been circumcised that remembers any pain. I don't know how that works as an infant. I'm sure it hurt, but I don't remember, have no recollection of it. And I've also, you can go through all the little vitamin K is at its peak on day 8. I don't know about all that stuff. All I know is if you have a child, circumcise them. Now, if you come to faith as an adult, stay as you are, Paul says. So what I did was I went back to Genesis and I wanted to know why circumcision back then and why does it show up in Leviticus again? What is going on there? So in Genesis chapter 12, here's basically what happens. Yahweh comes to Abraham and gives them this great grand promise. Yahweh said to Abram, "Go forth from your land and from your kin, from your father's house to a land which I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I'm going to curse." Well, they start going, and then there's a problem. There's a famine in the land, so they have to go down into Egypt, and they get a little bit scared there. And so Abraham basically lies that Sarai, is not his wife, but his sister. You see the lie? Because he says, hey, you're a really beautiful woman, and if they see you, they might kill me in order to get you. So can you lie? No faith. And so what happens is God intervenes in verse 17. Then Yahweh struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So here's what God's doing. Yeah, the land's occupied. You're going to get that by faith, but your little plan A or my plan A, but your plan B, that ain't going to work. Abram responded improperly to the promise. He should not have lied, and Yahweh intervenes. Now, there's a couple more interventions. I can't go through all of it today, but we'll just, the Melchizedek story is in there. But what happens now in chapter 15, after these things, the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abram. I'm a shield to you. Your reward shall be great." And Abram now goes to this other little thing. "O Lord Yahweh, what will you give me as I go on being childless?" So not only don't have the land, but even if I were to have something, there's no heir, there's nothing there. And so what is Abraham's response? It kind of comes through Sarah. Sarah says there's Hagar, and maybe you can have a downline children through Hagar. And so Abram doesn't do plan A again. He has relationship with Hagar. They have a baby, and that's not good either. So what happens is Yahweh comes to Abram and says, "Hey, hold up. You are not walking in faith." Notice too, when Yahweh calls Abram, is he circumcised or not circumcised? No. He is not circumcised. So here's what happens, and I have to shorten the story for you, is Yahweh says, You keep doing all these plan Bs, but all of your life is only going to happen by faith, by the divine intervention of me, God. I'm going to get the land for you. I'm going to give you an heir, and it's going to be through a seed, through a Messiah. And so essentially what happens is, what is circumcision? Circumcision is now a sign. You don't have an heir, and it's not going to come out of your shooting blank's body. Her body is as good as dead. So you just need to know that I'm going to divinely intervene in your life, and I'm going to bring about a baby, and his name's going to be Isaac, and here's the sign. Cut off that part of your private area. It's the skin, right? It's not overly amputatic. I made up a word, but I don't know what else to say that. I'm not going to amputate anything. It's just the foreskin. So what happens? What is that circumcision talking about? It's talking about you're going to have a mark in your flesh that through your seed, Abraham, though Sarah's womb is as good as dead, she is going to bring forth a child, and they're going to be circumcised, and it's going to be a sign generation after generation after generation that I will send a Messiah in your seed, will be a man, the Son of God, who's going to take care of this issue and give you a lasting inheritance. So that's what circumcision is about. It's about the divine intervention of a God that loves us. We have a heavenly, after this world life coming to us. And it ain't going to happen because we did anything. It's because of what the Son has done, what the Son is doing. So what happens is in Romans 2, verse 25, Paul writes, and I have to shorten it for you, "For indeed circumcision is of value if you practice the law. But if you are a transgressor of the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision." So let me translate for you. You can be circumcised in your flesh all you want, but unless you're listening to the Spirit and walking in obedience, that circumcision that you have is nothing. It's become uncircumcision. So if the uncircumcised man observes the righteous requirements of the law, will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? In other words, if you're 26 years old and you follow the Messiah as your Savior and you're listening to his voice and you're walking in his commands, your uncircumcision will become circumcision, because what it's really about is your heart. In Romans 4, again, I can't go through all of it, verse 9, Paul writes, "Therefore is this blessing on the circumcised or on the uncircumcised also? For we say faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised, and he will receive the sign of circumcision, a seal of righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised." So it's a sign about the Messiah. It's a sign that's reflective of faith. So, what I'm learning presently is that what Yahweh did with Israel, and indeed even to us, because I think it's appropriately followed, is there is a sign of circumcision that I would recommend if you have a child, when they're an infant, up to 8 days old, preferably on the 8th day, get them circumcised. Notice, was that circumcision performed because of the child's faith? No. It was the father's faith. Not of their own will, not of their own decision. In fact, that circumcision is nothing if they don't become circumcised of heart. get your son circumcised. But again, here's what I've learned, is that what Yahweh does is he creates a crucible of a communal situation, a way to shape a society that in the very fabric of what we obey sends a message. In other words, it's like God's governance on his people. Now, not all people will walk in his ways, but at least the governance itself, if the faithful people will apply it, at least sets a situation where at least those that are uncircumcised of heart will begin to ask the question, even my 2 boys, can I say they're fully walking with the Lord? I can't. But they look at their circumcision every day of their lives. And at some point, they got to ask, why did Dad do that? It's there. And you know what I know is they'll probably do that with their sons. And I might even have to ask them, why are you doing that? Now, I talk to them like I talk to you like they're full gone, but they're not full gone. It's not like that. Their hearts, they're struggling. You know, they're young men, and they're trying to figure out life. You know, they're in their early 20s, and I don't know if Amy has to remind me what I was like in my early 20s. I didn't have it all together. She reminds me I'm 54 and don't have it all together. So imagine you having it not all together way back then. You really didn't have it all together. So, I mean, I have to give people grace, but at the very least Yahweh gave us instruction on how to create a society of believers existing together. Now, will that circumcision on their private parts get them a relationship with Yahweh? No, that's just of the flesh. But at least Yahweh put in the governance. I appreciate that. And again, I want you to know, if anyone is 26 or 30 years old or 50 years old, do you need to be circumcised as a result of coming to faith? Well, I'm looking at Leviticus chapter 12, and I'm like, well, it says right here, I remember reading this, and I'm trying to understand it, but what I understand now is that if you miss the infant stage, if you miss the 8th day, that means that the governance of God is not in that community, and now if you've progressed past that, let it go, because that's not what it's about anyway. What it's really about is a heart turning to the Messiah and giving their heart fully over to the Messiah and walking in his ways. And your obedience itself will become your circumcision. That's the way Paul phrases it. I should let you talk, because we got plenty of more to go over. There's other chapters. What input do you have, questions that you have, or you need clarification? And if you want to get me, could you get me gently, please? I think I've just been wounded too much.
So I just wanted to speak. You just want me to yell?
We're trying.
Okay, I'll just start talking. But I just wanted to speak about just like the childbearing and like those days of separation, all of that. Because I used to look at it with that perspective, just like this is horrible. Women are just like bashed outside the camp. That's a terrible way to look at it and all this. But until I had kids of my own, it's not until I really understood the blessings hidden with that separation. So obviously we had Hattie January 15th, and we counted the days. We calculated April 5th was, that was just the period we'd be separated. Mm-hmm. And what that looked like for us was that I was not going to be obligated with things outside the community. There was no intimacy. I wasn't going to worry about cleaning, cooking, things like that. And it was amazing. And I want to speak to it just because, giving birth to a child of God, I really got to know who this child was for those 66 days. I didn't have to worry about the outside world, my obligations to lead in the moms group that I have, or the garden community that I'm also leading. And even here, the days that I felt okay, I was here, but there were some days where I didn't, and I just stayed home and did Shabbat with Hattie. And it was the blessings that I experienced, just obviously physically healing, but emotionally and spiritually really getting to know who this child was that Yahweh gave me was amazing. So, it's easy to read this and just think about how terrible it is, but until you actually go through it and really connect with the Creator and ask, what can I learn from this time? The blessings are amazing. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. And the reason I say thank you is because I always try to describe the things that we read in the scriptures that seem repulsive to our sensibilities in Western culture today. And I try to reframe it and what the intent really was. And sometimes I'm not successful, but I try. And it's so hard, the scriptures say, put together these group of elders, which we have. And remember, Yeshua's house is a year old. But here's what I know is that 4 men are not going to get together and start telling women, like, you're bleeding, you should not be here. Or, which I don't think anyway. But that is certainly freeing to go, if you're hurting, that you should have the freedom to not feel obligated. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I do know that Yahweh's instruction to us is a way to give life to everybody. And again, I don't think it should come down from elders, so to speak, but I do think that we should get to a place as a congregation where we can we should just get together with women and read these scriptures and say, how do you see this? Like, I didn't even know that was a benefit in that way for you. I didn't get it, but that really helps me. But we could talk to more women walking through this, and we could learn as men how to be more sensitive during those times. I don't know how else to describe it. All I know is, having been married for quite a few years, I have learned that when a woman goes through her menstrual cycle, that sometimes that can hurt really, really bad. And if you are a man, sometimes you can be insensitive to that. But because of my marriage and because of the scriptures, I've become a lot more sensitive. And I really get to be joyfully supportive of a woman in that time of her cycle. Okay, Victor?
Hi, I'm Victor. I always forget that part. When we had our sons, and we were going through the process, it was, well, let me back up and say this. I've said before I'm not a very emotional person, so, going through these things was not a big deal. But when we got into Torah and then we started having grandsons, and then talking to our kids about having our grandsons circumcised, and they all agreed. And I found that it was spiritually one of the most emotional things I had ever gone through. And not because it was circumcision and not because it was something we're supposed to do or it was in the Bible. The only thing I can say, it was a spiritually emotional thing. And where it came from, I don't know, but I know it didn't come from me. And I know we were doing it because we felt that we were supposed to. It was a connection to God. It was a sign between him and his children. And during the process, just out of nowhere, each and every time, it just hit me like nothing I've ever experienced before. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Like a good wife, I'll clarify a little more. Sorry. We hired the rabbi to come on the 8th day and do the bris. So it's a whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what he's referring to. It was just really amazing.
Thank you.
That's all. I didn't know if that was clear in what he said.
No.
But, okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Anyone else on this? Yeah.
My name is Bee. Last week I said that my husband and I keep Torah kosher because God knows what's good for us, not because we're under the law.
Mm-hmm.
But the same thing with circumcision. And I think that's what you mean. You're not saying it's under the law, so we have to do it, are you? I think you're saying it for the same reason I'm thinking, because it's good for us. My husband's brother had to have it done after he was married. No matter how clean he tried to keep, his wife kept getting infections, and so he had to have it done after he was married. And then also, if we did have any Jews here, they would be more comfortable.
Of
It
course.
would be out of honor
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah, you've asked me for a clarification. We had our little spat last week. A good spat. Part of the culture that we have at Yeshua's house is we can argue with each other in a good, healthy way, and I want to promote that. I personally am not comfortable suggesting for me, that any of the commands of our God are anything less than commands. What I am comfortable with is saying that, yes, they are exactly how you describe. They are all good for us. When someone enters my classroom, would I say that my command to say, Mr. Doherty, or sit in your chair, or be here before the tardy bell, I mean, it's a fact, but I'm not mean about it. And there are certain latitudes given depending on I don't know what it is, but it is, all I can tell you is, here's what I'm not comfortable as a teacher. I'm not comfortable in saying when the scripture says command or do forever or whatever those words are, I'm not comfortable shifting any of those. What I am comfortable in doing is, and this is part of who I am as a person, as I am learning how to apply all of these properly to my life, I am not seeking to learn how to properly apply them to your life. I'm not here to tell you, as a teacher, I'll tell you what I think the scriptures are saying, and I want to be responsible in that, but I'm not here to, like, for example, Amy and I are pretty good. We've been doing this for a long, long time, okay? Sabbath is for us, and we love it. When we first started, it was like boring us out of our mind, but now we love it. When sundown hits, like last night, Amy and I are the first to say, count me in. I'm so tired. I just want to do it, and we do it. And you might look at my life and go, boy, you guys are pretty legalistic about that. To which I would say, count me in to legalism, because I love being told to stop, because my body wants to keep working and working and working and working. I need to be told to stop, and I've just learned to let God do that. So in my life, Amy and I really do stop for all of Sabbath, and we really don't buy or sell. Now, let's just say that you do it. What do you think I'm going to do? Nothing. I'm going to teach you during appropriate times and tell you what I think the scriptures say. And I'm probably not going to say, this is a suggestion for you. I'm not going to say that. And the reason I'm not going to say that is because I don't think that's the way it presents in here. But that's me. And I realize I'm in the minority. I get it. But neither am I here to police people either. That was one of the commitments that I made I make this to people, is if you come here, you're going to watch a man try to do this as best as he can. But even God's instruction was not given to me so that I can beat myself up for it, because this is not a salvational issue, not even a sanctification issue. I just want to be part of the process of Yahweh's sanctification in me. And I'm not going to lie, what happens is, if the sheep hear his voice, I hear his voice, I hear it in the instruction, and so I just want to do it naturally. So I don't know how this all works for you. I know that there's people that come to Yeshua's house that they think it's not a command, because there's the Jew and Gentile thing, and then there's also, we're in the New Testament it's a new covenant post Yeshua's death and resurrection. But they still want to obey the commands. And here's what I'm going to say is, you're welcome. Okay, let's. I'm not going to teach it that way, but we can still walk in it together. I'm just not that police person. That's not who I am. I really got one job, and that's responsible for this body. And I'm going to do my best to shepherd, but that's about all I can do. I don't know if I answered your question, but, I'm doing my best to answer it. These are complicated things. It'd be easier just to talk about salvation and that's it. It was much easier to speak back in my old church plant days when I used to work for the Baptist General Conference. That was much easier. This is a whole different ball of wax. Okay, I'm going to end this discussion on this little note here. In Colossians 2, Paul says, 2, verse 9. I'll just start at verse 9. For in him, in Yeshua, all the fullness of the deity dwells bodily. And in him you have been filled, who is the head over all rule and authority, in whom you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. So all the young men are coming to faith, and they're worried about this flesh of a thing in their private area. Paul wants to give them this assurance. You were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands in the removal of the body of the flesh in the circumcision of Messiah, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of Yahweh, of God, who raised him from the dead. And you being dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive with him, having graciously forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt, consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us. That whole thing about Paul recognizing that he had been covetousness, had coveted. He also has taken it out of the way, nailing all that to the cross. Not his law. He hasn't nailed his instruction to the cross. He has nailed the certificate of debt. The law condemned you. You were called. You were identified for what you were, a person walking in transgression. You now have a certificate of debt that you can't pay for. So Yeshua pays it for you. That's what's happening there. Consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us. He nailed it to the cross, having disarmed the rulers and authorities. He made a public display of them, having triumphed over them in him. So the sum of the matter on circumcision is, think what's happening in Leviticus 12 isn't that the 26-year-old gets circumcised. It is about creating a societal construct. Circumcise your boys, and then now move into how do we handle this leaving of life from the woman's body with male and female, which we've addressed. Now, if you go over to chapter 13, I think what you have to do here is remember that we are on our way to the Day of Atonement in chapter 16. What's going to happen is Yeshua is going to return, Feast of Trumpets, right there with the shofar, that's that circle. And then 10 days later is the Day of Atonement. That'll be next week. We're going to talk about that. But the Day of Atonement is like, that's the big kahuna. Yeshua's going to return. He's going to present us before the Father is completely clean. Oh, that's going to be a day. But leading up to that, we have to deal with this issue of our leprosy. Now, when we think about Yeshua interacts with people that are infected with sarat. It's and they're Metzora. They're a person in condition of leprosy. Now, even though in our English translation it says leprosy, it just means any skin condition that is, potentially has a disease. And if you were to read through the text, what you're going to see is that when the priest, because they didn't have Kaiser, looked at you, I say Kaiser because that's what I have. Maybe you have Sutter, I don't know. But they looked at the skin, and basically one of the issues was, is it deeper than the skin? If it was just skin deep, it was just a scratch, an itch, something like that. But underneath that, there could be a rotting of the flesh. And then it was kind of this back and forth of how do we determine what is clean and unclean? Now, if a man is what's in purview here, is if a person has an eczema that is below the skin, and we've got to take care of that, we're going to put you outside the camp, and when you're outside the camp, it's just kind of we're quarantining you. We're not trying to hurt anyone, we're just trying to protect your family. But here's the thing is, every one of us are outside the camp. So what does the priest do? If you read, and that's why I'm looking at my time, we can't read through it, but hopefully you read it. But what did the priest do? The priest would go outside the camp. to take care of this Metzora, to take care of the leprosy. What does Yeshua do? Yeshua goes outside the camp. He's in heaven. He comes, and he comes where you are. He's going to heal you. He's going to take care of your issue. Okay? Now, if you read, I'll just read a little bit so you know what I'm doing. Chapter 14, it says, "Then Yahweh spoke to Moses," Leviticus 14, saying, "This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. Now he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out to the outside of the camp. Thus the priest shall look, and if the infection of leprosy has been healed in the leper, then the priest shall give a command to take 2 live clean birds and cedar wood and a scarlet string and hyssop for the one who is to be cleansed. The priest shall also give a command to slaughter and the one bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. As for the live bird, he shall take it together with the cedar wood and the scarlet string and the hyssop, and he shall dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the running water. He shall sprinkle it 7 times, the one who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and pronounce him clean, and then he shall let the live bird go free over the open field." And I'll stop there for that one. Okay. Victor's going to be our leper today. I remember 20 years ago, so it's 2025, it literally was 2004 because I remember this. It was the first time, here I am, this young seminary student. Well, I had actually graduated at that time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a hiccup. The hiccup is discovering that the instruction of God is for you when you're obviously planted a evangelical church. You see how that's a problem? It was a problem for me. So anyway, here is hyssop. It's fake. You almost got live birds because I just thought I'd get some live birds. But I went to Petco. I said, how does this work? Because I want to give them back to you when I'm done, live and well. I'm not going to hurt any of them. And it just became too much. He said, just return them. He said, what do you want it for? So funny. I said, well, in the Bible, it says to take 2 birds and you sacrifice one. I said, but I'm not going to sacrifice the bird. He's like, you can do what you want. He was way too willing to have me choke a bird. So I just like, no, I'm not going to choke the bird. I just want to illustrate this because I know that when people read Leviticus 14, they're just so bored out of their mind. And I told him that, and he's like, I can kind of see that. And I said, well, I'm just trying to illustrate. So I just went to Amazon. I got those pretty nice, I think, for $10 myself. But anyway, so here's our leprous fellow. And we want him to be back in the camp. And we just kind of check, and we just make sure that it's not...
Don't touch right there, I have a rash.
Stop. Is it below the skin? In some sense, we want to be totally clean before our Messiah. We want to be clean around this nuclear reactor of a God. And best I can tell, there is nothing explicit in Scripture that says what those 2 birds represent. You have to do like some circumstantial evidence researching. I'm going to tell you my conclusions, and then you can go search it out for yourself and just see if I'm nuts or not. So what we're going to do first is, now that you are clean, I've brought this out to you, okay? And I have to sacrifice this bird. Now, this is a fake bird. I'm not doing a real sacrifice here. And when I mean sacrifice, it's not that, sacrifice happens every day of your life. When you go to Bel Air and you eat a turkey sandwich, just know that sacrifice happened. You're just not used to it. So for the Israelite people, they were just totally used to this. So then now I've taken this bird, and this is essentially you. Now, I messed up. I'm going to tell you how I feel right now. 24 years ago, when I first did something like this, it was with Passover, and I felt so disjointed. Now when I do Passover, or in other words, kind of facilitate it, I'm way more familiar with it. I'm not a fish out of water. This is the first time I've ever handled these objects. I've only read about it. Now, what I did wrong was, no. Huh? If you want to, yes. Oh, yeah. What I did wrong is you're supposed to do the sacrifice with pure water. Sarah, can you help me just for a sec? So I think you need to get the idea here, is that what this is it's a mikvah. It's like the sacrifice is in living water, which means the water is flowing. All right, so you're going to put this over an earthen vessel. All right, so go ahead and pour it over the bird. Good, and now the bird has died, and then we're going to put the bird down here. Okay, so what we've done there is we are taking his life and we're saying, you are dead to that old leprous life, and now the blood of this little animal is now combined with this living mikvah water. It's like this water that's flowing from our Messiah to cleanse us. And we just happen to put some red food coloring in here. So you put the bird in here, and once the bird is down in here, then the instructions are you take the live bird, and then you take the hyssop, and you take a scarlet thread, and then you take some cedar wood. And the cedar wood, it's kind of reddish, and I guess it has some preserving qualities to it, but you take the live bird and all this, and you dip it in the water. You should check me on the scriptures here, because this is how I'm just out of sorts, because I have never done this. But you do it 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Something like that. And then you're supposed to take the water. What's unclear to me in the scriptures, do you take it from here or from the living water? I really don't know. And you sprinkle it before Yahweh 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Something like that. And then you take this bird and then you let it fly off into the wilderness. Okay. Now, symbolism here. Symbolism is Yeshua has died. This is his blood. The preserving nature, from best I understand it, the preserving nature of his blood and life, that we walk in him. And then this one is totally unclear to me, other than hyssop is a general thing that is used for the smearing of things. Now, in all that, because I've never done it before, there's supposed to be a wave offering. You wave something before the Lord, I'm not sure. But this, in some sense, for the leper, is you are cleansed by this little animal here, identifying with the death of our Messiah. It's cleansing. And then this, now, what's evident in the Hebrew text is that these are both to be undomesticated birds. So I couldn't even get the parakeets down at Petco. Undomesticated birds. And so when this bird goes off over a field, it says in Leviticus, it like goes away. So symbolically, you have died to yourself. You're being mixed with the Messiah's blood, and your sins are now separated from you forever. It goes outside the camp. And then you are deemed clean, and then you can go back in. Now, in all that, like, why is he up here? There's 2 little things that you do, one with the water and one with the oil, and we have to like condense here. But you take some of the oil. This is just olive oil from Costco, so it's nothing special. And you put it on your hand like this. And you were to go to the leper. I'm not sure I'm not supposed to do that. I'm learning myself. And you take some of that oil, and you're going to put it on the leper's right earlobe. Your right earlobe. Not my right. We're going to put it right there. Now, why do we do that? Now, you also do that with the blood, but there's another part. If you continue to read in chapter 14, you do it with the oil. Yahweh is opening up your ears. You're no longer leprous, and now he's going to hear the word of the Lord, and he's going to listen and obey. That's what Shema means. So when we do the Shema up here, Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, that's the believer saying, if this is one God, and my heart hears him, and I'm going to follow him with all my life. So we're opening that up. And we're also going to put it on his right thumb, just as a symbol of everything he puts his hand to, he is going to give that to the Lord completely, and his big toe. So the big toe is now, everywhere he walks, everywhere he goes, he's giving all of his life over to the King of Kings. Now, you're clean. Now, when you go back into the camp, you're invited into the camp, but you still have to stay outside your tent for 7 days. And then on the 8th day, you can go in. It's another layer of, I guess, purification within the camp. But when you're in the camp, now I'm not really sure that part. I don't get it yet. But all I know is you've got to stay outside, and then you can go in on the 8th day. Now, remember, we just went through the dedication of the temple. And the dedication of the temple happened on what day? 7 days up to an 8th day. There was an 8th day. When circumcision? On the 8th day. This all kind of points to moving us to a place where we are living stones being built up into a spiritual house, and we're giving ourselves. We were leprous before we met our Messiah, but he came outside to get us. I'm so glad. Came outside to get us, cleanse us. And I think what's difficult for me is I'm trying to, thank you. I know that wasn't that big of a job, but what can I do? Part of the reason I wanted to do that too is, even though I didn't get it perfect, was that really all that difficult? It really wasn't. That's what I think people read this and they're like, I'm so glad I don't have to do this because it's so hard. And I actually don't think it was that hard. It's pretty easy. Yeshua even said that my burden is easy, my yoke is light. It really was all the extra stuff that the Pharisees added into all their life that made the burden heavy, not God's word. That was pretty easy. So, what I will admit that is a struggle for me is, here's what the Torah says to do. Are we, as Yeshua's house, actually going to identify leprosy and start doing this? I don't think so. Am I entirely sure why? No. Other than, I think that we are post-death and resurrection, and so even though the command is there, I think we need to figure out how to appropriately apply these commandments to the life of our body. And I think in part, maybe if there is someone that has felt like they're following Yeshua, but they have fallen in some way, that there could be some type of ritual like this that we can just bless people with so they feel like a tangible thing before they come back into the community. I don't know. I'm still working that out myself. What I do know is it's beautiful, and in the same way that Anna was talking about she being on the, having 66 days to do that, I'm wondering if there's people that have felt like they've been outside the community for some reason, and they just want to get a tangible experience of being cleansed, that we're not going to go get any birds or anything, but if we can somehow incorporate these sorts of things in an appropriate way so that they can feel like, you know what, a reminder of how good Yeshua is for us. What's that look like? I'm not entirely sure, but that's why I keep going back to Ephesians 5. Learning. And what I've discovered is it's going to take a while to learn together what that looks like. 10 minutes is all yours. Yeah.
So you wouldn't be able to do the purification ritual because we don't have priests?
We are a kingdom of priests. Let's talk through this.
Yeah, so in the order of Melchizedek we are, but the specific commandment here, it wouldn't be,
Yeah, we're trying.
So I'll just use big boy voice.
Yep.
So effectively in the context of Leviticus, it's talking about negative no-go. So
Yeah, we're done with the mics.
it's talking about Levitical priests.
Yeah.
So you can't, does that then, to use a Melchizedek priest would be to nullify the commandment because the commandment is very clearly in the context of Levitical priests. So if only the Levitical priest can perform the cleansing ritual, it's just the same reason that Yeshua can't do what a Levitical priest would do, because he's not in the order of Leviticus, he's in the order of Melchizedek. So you have to keep the priesthood separate.
Whoa, wait, time out. I'm arguing in a learning sort of way.
Yeah.
Yeshua is the high priest, so wouldn't you say that the Levitical high priest is exactly what Yeshua becomes?
Well, no, because he's in the order of Melchizedek.
That's right, but he's still a high priest.
Yes,
Okay, so it's a high priest in the order of Melchizedek.
correct.
Yep. But what you're saying is that the high priest functioning in the way that a Levitical high priest would be different.
Yeah, it's different function. It's just, it's not that it's, I mean, the author of Hebrews would argue that the Melchizedek, being a high priest in the order of Melchizedek would be the supreme, it's a greater ministry, it's greater than what the Levites have, so that Christ might receive all the glory, Messiah might receive all the glory. But having said that, there's certain things that priests do, because the whole context of Leviticus is a community of believers living around a tabernacle with the presence of the living God in
Sure.
it. So the whole point is, how do you do that? And so I would think that it'd be an interesting thing going forward to look at James. Somebody's sick, what does James say to do? He says, have the elders anoint them with oil and pray over it, and
Yeah.
the prayer will ideally make the sick
man
person
well. Right?
So it's clear that that's working in a diaspora context, because it's highly unlikely that unbelieving Levitical priests who are in the temple are going to allow a Gentile who has come to faith to go into the tabernacle or into the temple when you've still got that dividing wall
Yeah,
at Herod's temple
yeah,
in Jerusalem.
yeah.
So this is a diaspora context where you're trying to figure out how this actually works.
So, because I'm working this out, is there this dynamic then in the Melchizedekian priesthood?
Yeah, so I think that you might be able to glean from the two birds. It's interestingly similar to the Yom Kippurim. And the reason I say that is that you have one goat dies, one goat goes.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
So in the same thing with the doves,
Yeah,
you
sorry.
have the doves where one dies, one goes free. So what's being pictured? Well, you can look at Messiah. One dies for another's uncleanness,
Mm-hmm,
and then one goes free.
mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at what's actually going on there, I would say that that's what's being pictured. Ultimately, Messiah fulfills that in the Melchizedek type, right? So I would say that that's probably what's going on. It's something has to die for something to live.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The way it is.
Yeah, totally fair. Yeah. I don't feel schooled here. I feel like I'm working it out. Over here.
Hi, I'm Georgie. One thing, when we look at Torah, there are things that are germane to the assembly. Then you have your things that are just germane to the Leviticus priesthood. You have things that are just germane to the sovereign, the judges, to doing specifically in the temple. There are things that are made just for their laws that are just for married people,
Mm-hmm,
people who are separated or divorced,
mm-hmm,
for women
mm-hmm.
or men,
Yeah,
and it's all broken down. Servants, and there's the farmer, the animals. So he has put this in place for us to see where our boundaries are, for us to. I agree with Jacob 100% what he was saying about, because if we
I do
start
too.
doing things like this,
Yeah,
we are actually breaking Torah.
I
By
agree.
stepping into the Leviticus,
Yeah.
or in the
Yeah.
Levitical priesthood. We're not those. We're completely different under the Melchizedek order. So and I think that that's where a lot of people who don't understand Torah when they say, are you keeping all 612? Oh my gosh, no, I would be breaking Torah if I tried to
Yeah,
keep
you've heard
all
me say that too,
612.
yes?
Yes.
Yes.
So, I think that that's just, just people's education of the Torah and understanding how it works. That we can't tread where we're not, so we can't tread where the sovereign treads, where the judges tread. So I was just kind of wanted to piggyback off of what Jacob was saying there about that.
Yeah.
And as far as you said something about you weren't sure what the hyssop was for, I can't guarantee it, but I know that David, a lot of times, he says, cleanse me with hyssop. So I think that, that it is somehow related to, he'll say, cleanse my tongue,
Yeah.
make me clean.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one of the things that we can look at the hyssop for, that it has some sort of a cleansing, spiritual cleansing aspect to it.
Right.
So, and as far as the doves go, I would have really liked to have seen you holding that live dove up there, keeping it contained while you were doing all that stuff.
That's true, but
That
it
would have
wouldn't.
been entertaining.
Well, I would not even have done, even would not even have tried. They would have had to stay in their cage. Things are above my pay grade. Here and then, okay. Here, there.
Hi, I'm Patty. So the verse, first in the natural, then in the spiritual, has been resonating with me for months. And so I think our Heavenly Father is always teaching us, from we do these things in the physical, but then they have the spiritual aspect to it. So, and I saw the connection too that Jacob made with the goats as well. I
Yeah.
completely see that.
Yeah.
And the hyssop, I'm thinking about the Israelites and they're putting the blood on the door frame with the hyssop, right?
Right.
And then, so all these connections that he's teaching us. One thing that I learned that was really cool in a Dr. Alwine study was after the woman gives birth, so she's like working with the Creator, right, and creating new life comes out of her body. And then there's postpartum bleeding, and around day 10 to 14, her blood changes from red to white. That really happens. Isn't
News
that
to me.
cool? So that's like day 10 makes me think that's the number of a congregation, and 14 is the number of messiahs. So it's really interesting. So he's teaching us, new levels, like deeper layers of what he wants us to know. The connections are pretty amazing.
There is a part here, chapter 13, verses 13 and 14. Notice it says, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce clean him who has the infection. It has all turned white, and he is clean. Which when you read that, you're thinking, whoa, it's all white now. Why is this clean? So I wonder if there's that. Umberto?
As far as the details of how all this work, I'm still working through it. But as far as a practical application of what we can do with this in our own daily lives, the leper is for the sake of keeping other people clean. They announce themselves and they say unclean. And the fact that the priest goes out of the community to go get them, and if Yahweh grants that individual healing and restoration, they are brought back in by the priest, which is what Yeshua does for us as well. As you mentioned, he goes out of the camp and brings us back into community.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking, like, in my own household, there's been so much sickness, and it makes it harder for us to be able to come on Shabbat at times. Just last week, it was just me, my wife, and kids stayed home. And forget who it was Jacob that mentioned about the elders laying hands on people to pray for them. And I know that we had discussed potentially going out and laying hands on someone, even potentially today, and just praying for healing for them. But that desire should be in all of us, that if there's anyone out who is not able to come in to congregate with us, that we should be having this desire for reconciliation for them, to pray healing for them, because ultimately the desire is, if somebody is out of the camp, that is, yes, there's instructions for that, but the ideal isn't that. The ideal is to bring them back in for everyone to be united together. So if nothing else we can pull out of this is that we should all be actively working towards going out and seeking those that are outside and bringing them in, praying, meeting them out there where they're at, praying for them, and seeking that restoration so that we can all be united together as a congregation.
Perfect. Okay, we'll do Jacob, then I'm doing last word, because I have to, I'll get in trouble. And then we're going to wrap up for today.
So you had brought up Psalm 51, which was what my mind was going through. And I think that David might actually be pulling from this leprosy cleansing commandment, because he says that you desire integrity in the innermost self, and you teach me the wisdom deep within. Purify me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. And then he goes down and he says, create in me a clean heart and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not banish me from your presence. Well, what happens to a leper when they're verified as a leper is contagious?
Gotta go outside
They're
the camp.
banished from the presence.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't help but wonder if he's drawing the language from this cleansing ritual, saying, cleanse me with hyssop, the way that the leper is cleansed,
Yeah.
and I shall be whiter than snow, and then I won't be banished from your presence, because the first thing that you get to do is on the 8th day, you get to be taken to the entrance of the tent of meeting and be close to the presence. So I just thought it was interesting.
Okay. I'm wrapping up. We're going to sing a song. I'm going to do the best I can here. I'm glad we had that conversation. If you're newer here, I know the difference between the Levitical priesthood and the Melchizedekian priesthood. We've had many conversations on that. Hebrews, in part, is all about that. It's that everything that we read about in the Torah, the instruction of our God, is a shadow, an important shadow of a heavenly reality. So this high priest in the order of Melchizedek, there's a lot of shadow pictures that are happening in the Torah that concern the Levitical priesthood. But in Hebrews 7, 5, 6, 7, you see now Yeshua, Jesus, coming in and filling that role, and then the shadow gives way to the actuality. When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about this as a shadow, and what I'm suggesting, and I am suggesting, is no, we cannot do this lawfully in that way. I know that. But there's something going on here that might be important for the person experiencing a certain death outside the community that can receive healing and come back into a community. And that's my point, is I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm just willing to go through the difficult process of being faithful to the text to try to figure out what does that look like given the reality of the Melchizedekian priesthood, Yeshua, our eternal high priest. And no, we cannot do anything lawfully in that way. But what is the shadow picture teaching us that we might walk in? That's what I'm interested in. So, in all that, when I graduated from seminary, way back in the day, it was much easier just to be a regular evangelical pastor that just did away with Torah. Whew, that was much easier. The reason it's much easier is because you preach one thing, and that is salvation. Come to Jesus, get rid of your sin, walk with him. And you don't ever define what walking with him looks like. You just have these general ideas of what you shouldn't be doing, like, you're not partying at 3 a.m. anymore. And we tend to make up what those rules look like. What I'm about now is admitting that I don't know it all, and I am now about not overlooking any part of the scriptures, though I didn't grow up with it. I just wanted to understand it and see what the right application is, and I just don't think I can do that alone. I think I can do it with other people better. That said, I think I watched this Facebook post one time, and it was within this last year, and it was an advertisement for a church. Come and be with us while we get it figured out, something to that effect. And one of the posts underneath it was, if you haven't got it figured out, you shouldn't be teaching anything. Man. I kind of got what they were saying. There's some sense in which I've got all the fundamentals figured out, but how to apply the instruction of our God in a right and good way for a community of believers isn't something I have all figured out. And I'll just tell you this, neither did Spurgeon, neither did J.I. Packer. I could just go down my list. They didn't have it figured out either. In fact, they had it so unfigured out, it was much more comfortable, because I know the experience is, let's just not talk about those things ever. We'll not preach on that. We'll not talk about it. We'll just, and be so glad that we don't even have to deal with that, because now it's part of the past. I'm just not comfortable with that. So I'm willing to have a little egg on my face every so often so that we can be faithful to the text over time and do it in a right and good way. And I'm willing to go through the embarrassment. Am I all that embarrassed right now? Not really. Part of it is I'm getting old and tired. And you kind of have to get to that place in your life where if you're going to start something like Yeshua's house to begin with, you really kind of had to be at the end of your rope. And my end was, okay, I'm good. Whatever you want, Lord. I'm just going to open it up for business. Bad word, but open it up and see what happens with these people that want to try to actually take all of your word and live it rightly. And that's where we are. And that's frankly probably where I'm going to continue to be until I die, because these mysteries of our God are beyond me. So, what do? We talk about it, and we're going to keep growing together. Let's pray. We'll sing. And that's why Shabbat happens every Shabbat, so we can keep working it out. Abba, Daddy, thank you for your word. Thank you that we are able to have a good, honest conversation about likely the most boring text in all the Bible. But it's really important, and I want to learn the depth of it. I want to understand it, and I'll understand it better with my friends. So be with us as we continue to give our whole selves to you. What I do know is that all of us should be really thankful. I'm thankful. But on behalf of all of us, thank you. We were infected with an incurable disease. Our skin was rotting away. We were walking zombies. And you healed us. You cleansed us. You gave us life. And we have eternal, like an eternal hope, a security in you. That we're going to be with you. We are now, but we're going to be with you in a way that we can never even quite fully imagine when you return. And for that, we're so grateful. But until that happens, help us to walk more closely with you every day of our lives. And to be willing, like you did, to go outside the camp and to be a kingdom of priests and to show people love and concern and care and make it so they want to be with us and love them and just bring them into the camp. That's what we want for everybody. And sometimes I'm that leper. I'm the one that's got to be brought into the camp. Not just my job. We're a kingdom of priests. So help us to be that for one another. No condemnation, but a solution to our problem. And as we walk along here, my prayer is that you would help us to understand, what does this stuff look like under the order of Melchizedek? A whole different regime, and we're so grateful for that. In the name of our Messiah, Yeshua, we pray. Amen.